Welcome to the Culture of Agriculture, brought to you by Sputnik Equipment.
Go ahead and introduce yourself. I'll follow up.
Yeah, so my name's Lane Richens. I work for Stotz Equipment. I'm the Precision Ag Manager.
Are you the manager for all of Stotz or a local Stotz?
So I run all of the technology stuff. So I'm the Precision Manager for all of Stotz Equipment.
What area does that cover?
So Stotz Equipment is a family-owned dealership. We have 25 locations in 8 states. So we cover from Arizona all the way up here to the Snake River Plain. So we have locations in Burley, Twin Falls, Preston, and American Falls. Those are our main Idaho locations. And then we also have some stores over in Wyoming, Utah.
What do you guys do out of Wyoming? There's not a whole lot of ag in that state, is there?
There is actually. In Riverton, there's a lot of sugar beets.
Okay.
And some row crops there in Riverton. There's some row crops out in Casper. That's our 2 locations in Wyoming. But a lot of that is ranching.
It might alienate quite a few people, but I never really cared much for Wyoming. Every time I've had to drive through it, it's just been kind of miserable.
Well,
So
I think they put those roads in a strategic location.
like the worst place that they could find.
Because there's some really cool stuff in Wyoming.
It's like my job here at Sputnik, I'm the shipping manager. So it's my job to get any of our equipment anywhere that it needs to go throughout the continental U.S., Canada, any of that stuff. And I'm in charge for getting the stuff that sends overseas actually loaded in the container to get out. So like anytime it's got to go on I-80 on that eastern part of 80 in Wyoming, it's always miserable. So like anytime I load a truck with a big even flow that has to go out there, I kind of feel bad every time because it's like pulling a giant parachute and they're supposed to pull at 60 miles an hour at least through that stretch, and the wind's always blowing like 90 miles an hour through there.
Yeah.
So
It's a rough patch.
So you've got stores in Wyoming too, and then down through...
And then we go down through 4 Corners. So we have a store in Colorado and then in Farmington, New Mexico. Then down through Arizona. We have 5 locations in Arizona.
Okay.
And then we also have Las Vegas, and then we also have several stores in California that are primarily golf and turf.
Oh, okay.
So Stotz Equipment, we have, we do a little bit of everything. We got the green equipment and then the compact construction, and we also have our golf line.
Are you much in like construction stuff or not really?
So we just barely picked up the CCE, is what Deere people call it, compact construction equipment.
Oh, okay.
We picked that up within the last year or so.
So you're going to be starting to push on that too.
Yeah.
So the precision part of precision ag is going to blend over into that pretty well as well then.
Yep, and just recently we rebranded. So we used to be Stotz Equipment Precision Ag, and now we're Stotz Precision because we have a lot of technology that we're dealing with on a daily basis from the construction side. So on the construction side, we have leveling systems they have a smart grade compact track loader that will do full GPS leveling and earth moving. And then on our golf side, we have a lot of technology there too. So we've been moving a lot of GPS sprayers in the golf world, and the cool part about that is we've been doing that in agriculture for a long time, right?
So it's easy.
So we're using the same exact technologies that we've been proven through agriculture for 15 years,
forever.
And now we're just moving it over into the golf world. So that's been a challenge at times.
Trying to figure out how to get that.
Yeah, and just get it on that smaller scale. Like the boom on that sprayer is 18 feet,
That's
so it's
like a section on a bigger one. I can see how that'd be rough. So, like I said, my background is now I'm working at Sputnik. I've been here a little over a year now. Before that, I grew up farming. So I was born and raised in the eastern Idaho area. I grew up on a farm up north of here about an hour, and started working there when I was 7, and then from there it's just history of farming for the last forever. A couple years ago I moved back out into the Midwest and did some farming out there and a couple other things.
Really?
So done potatoes, wheat, barley, corn, soybeans, a lot of different stuff. I had a really good farm manager for me out in the Midwest, so I didn't have to be like the poor guy that was up at the crack of dawn or staying up all night long harvesting. He did a great job, but was still out there a little bit. But yeah, tons of precision ag history. So like I said, I started doing the light bar thing when I can't remember how long ago now, like light bars became a thing. And then
Yeah.
from there, the next one I really remember was like the Beeline guidance systems.
Yep.
We used that. And then after Beeline, we switched to Trimble. And then I think we were one of the first farms at least on the west side of the Mississippi, if not even just the nation, to set Trimble up to do implement guidance too. And that was actually on a Sputnik planter. We took one of their 8-row pull type planters and had them put another axle on it because the standard configuration is 2 axles on the back, so 4 wheels. But where I grew up farming was really hilly, so we needed an extra axle on there to help hold those hills. And when we switched from a 6-row hang-on type potato planter to the 8-row pull type planter, our rows actually got a lot straighter.
Really?
With a lot less fuel consumption because the hang-on planter was a Lockwood air cut planter, which takes, at the time anyway, I haven't run one in a number of years now, but at the time took a ton of power to get that fan to run. So when we made that switch to doing the implement steering, that was a huge bonus. And then I think a year or two after that, we switched into using Trimble's chemical application stuff for controlling our fertilizer and chemical. And I remember our projection was it would pay back in 2 years at most, and it actually paid back the first year. And then we ran that for a couple years, and then we switched to John Deere after that. So, and
that was the best thing you ever did, right?
Sure. They all work, right?
Yeah.
Like Trimble was in business, and they got there first. It's like I remember. I can't remember how long ago it was now, and I don't know that I want to because, like I said, every time I tell these stories, it gets longer and longer and longer ago, and I tell a story, and what used to be 5 years ago is now 10, or what used to be 20 is now 30, and it kind of makes you feel a little sick to your stomach because the time goes so fast.
Right.
Right. But I remember we ran Trimble for a couple years, and then we actually ran that prototype John Deere tractor when they were doing the 8RT demo stuff, when they were switching to using the CVT transmission in them. So we demoed that spring, and we ran the Trimble guidance on that tractor pulling one of our planters. And I think it was that same year, which was probably, had to be 10 years ago now, somewhere in there. The guys from the John Deere Green Star program basically showed up and said, hey, what do we need to do to make sure that this John Deere guidance works? And I think within a year or two, we'd switched over. But having John Deere have all their steering set up immediately from the factory to where you just throw that dome on and go, that was huge. And so much cheaper than what Trimble had at the time, where you had to buy the controller, mount it inside the cab, and then if you wanted to move it, you had to move all of that. It just made it so much more simple.
And I think now they're even like the new tractors, if you could get them because of the supply chain issues, right? But if you could get them, like those tractors just coming with a receiver already in it, the display's already in it, so you don't even have to, it's just part of the tractor anymore.
Yeah, you compare it what it is now, where precision ag is now versus where it was 10 years ago, or even like in its infancy 20 years ago, and it's massive. So
Well, I think anymore, like the technology must be working, or they're not. The tractors broke down.
Oh no, I remember right about the time we were making that switch from Beeline to Trimble was kind of that, and this was probably almost 14 or 15 years ago now. That was when it was the switch over from the guidance is really, really nice to have to if the guidance is not there, we are not going.
Yeah, we're gonna sit here.
Yeah, and I remember remarking at the time to probably anybody who would listen, like, I remember when if, steering was just nice to have, and if you had it, great, and if not, you'd go. And now everybody, if they can't steer, can't even move.
Yeah.
Because, and I remember on our farm, it made a huge difference because you went from being able to, like, you would need an operator that was a really good operator to, you could put somebody in here that doesn't necessarily know how to run the tractor very well, as long as they can run whatever you're running.
Yeah.
So, like if you were just running something simple, like a disc or a chisel plow, if you had somebody that could put on a new tongue or make sure that they were discing, like they were greasing your gangs or whatever, that was good enough. Whereas before you had to have somebody that could actually drive relatively straight to not waste days by the time you were done going over your entire farm.
Right.
So,
and I think it's changed so much though. To now, like, yeah, guidance, but the guidance is that's just the easy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think we're moved into the digital age, and the amount of data that we're collecting at all the time is what's valuable now. I mean,
Right.
obviously, if it's not steering,
Yeah, that's
the tractor's broke down.
Yeah, for sure. And like, what would you say? It's like if we hit some of these points here that were outlined for us. So the first thing is what's precision ag, right? Which I think we've probably covered because it goes anywhere from guidance to fertilizer, chemical control, right? To actual data capturing, right? Because anybody can capture
And
the
then,
data.
I think-
then it's about what you do with the
Yes,
data,
right.
right?
Like, let's not forget that's the most important and the most valuable piece. Like,
Right.
having a bunch of data
Yeah.
is useless.
Yeah.
We got to figure out what to do with that data and how are we going to use that to get better and improve what our operation is. How can we turn that into dollars?
That was one of my the things I like to remark on, we'll say, when I was farming, because like we had some data that was 20 years old or more, 30 years old in some cases, and we just had it. Never really did anything with it, but we had it.
Yeah.
We could say we had it. But now, especially, you look into row crop stuff like corn and soybeans, where they're gathering all that data and they're actually able to take and really use it. So what are you seeing as far as that on the crops that are more relevant to what Sputnik's doing? You seeing anything pushing that way with potatoes yet?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's been yield monitors out there for several years, but I think one of the barriers has been price and complexity, which is what I feel like the take rate on that kind of a product was I would say pretty low overall. So we kind of a little bit more about Stoats equipment. Because we have a big footprint, but we also really believe that this technology is what the future of agriculture is, and that's how our customers, like the owner of the company, he really thinks that the customers that are most ingrained with the technology and what we're doing are going to be the most profitable farmers. And that's what our goal is, and that's what we're striving to do, is try to help them become the most profitable. And I think some of the cool parts is we are geographically spread out.
Yep.
In Arizona, we have a different crop mix than we do up in Idaho, but we also have some of the same stuff. We have potatoes in Arizona. We have, obviously in Arizona, we have a lot of cotton, which you don't have in Idaho and in that country. But the cool part of that is because we're really invested in the technology, we have a big team. So I have a team of 25 guys that are just specialized in the technology. Though they're obviously spread out across that footprint, but we have a lot of guys. And what that creates is it creates a lot of know-how, a lot of relationships, a lot of understanding of what's going on. And then we get them together all the time. So then we really try to help each other understand what's going on in Arizona and how's that going to relate to Idaho, what's going on in Idaho and how's that going to relate to Arizona. And then it's all going to go through the middle, through Utah. And
One of the advantages to that might be like one of the things that I always liked about farming, but is also a big downside, is you only get to plant once a year. You only get to harvest once a year. So there's only a chance for, if your planting season takes 2 or 3 weeks, you can only learn anything better in those 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Yep.
Same goes for harvest. But in Arizona, you start planting, when did you say? First part of December?
yeah,
So you start planting in December, and when do you finish?
they're done probably February.
Yeah, so you're planting for 3 months.
Yeah.
That's 3 months that you can try something, see how it works. If it works, try and improve it. If it doesn't work, figure out what didn't work, and then re-implement it. You compare that to what you end
And
up doing
then
up here.
I'm gonna come
so you
up
can
to
take
Idaho.
what you learned down there, bring it up here, and implement it so that
We got
these guys
another
here
try.
can actually work it, and then the seasons bleed over to where you can keep trying stuff. So that's huge, especially when your planting season takes so long and then it can bleed over through different areas. You can learn a lot. So like on your yield monitors for potatoes, how does that work?
So what we did was, there's several different yield monitors out there, but what what we did is we came up with our own yield solution.
Okay.
So it's a Stoats equipment. We developed it. We came up with it. And so what we did with it is I actually took the technology from cotton and took some of that knowledge and know-how and combined that with putting John Deere cotton picker parts on a Sputnik potato digger. And then we're weighing and tracking trucks, and we can create that yield map so that we have a scorecard, right? Because that's what a yield map is that's our scorecard or our grade at the end of the season, right? So we can then start learning and improving.
How do you account for tear on the harvester?
That's the hard part.
It's always been.
Yeah.
I remember, like I said, a long time ago now, there was a guy who was trying to get us to buy some yield monitors, and we tried it out for a little while, but it was so variable because of the tear that it didn't work. So
that's
is it
the hard
getting
part. So
any better that way?
It's not necessarily any better.
I mean, as the harvest equipment gets better at eliminating
Correct.
the dirt, that'll get better, right?
And
so
I
this
think-
was long enough ago. I can't remember if this was before we bought into Sputnik equipment or not. Like, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was really rough because he was using an ultrasound sensor, I think, to try and measure the flow of the potatoes on top of the belted chain, right? So like the higher it was, the better your yield was.
Yeah.
But if you're going through a wet spot where you can't get rid of your dirt, or if it's a spot where there's a lot of clods or something like that, or really rocky, like any of it's going to throw it off.
And I think it's going to get better, and we'll have more solutions to that as time goes on. I know there's a lot of companies out there trying to figure it out, but as of right now, we're just weighing it.
Okay.
So we've got load cells on the belted chain, and we're weighing it as it goes across. We're also measuring the temperature of the surface temperature of the potatoes as they're going into that truck, and we're logging all that, and then we're taking that information, and it's all integrated with the John Deere system. So it's fully integrated with the John Deere side, so it's just going to send it right straight to the cloud. So there's no additional like telematics or anything that we have to add to the machine.
So when you take your yield map, right? So you have a harvester and it's digging however many rows, right?
Yep.
So it's at least 2 rows and up to 16 rows,
Yep.
right? So do you just take an average your yield across however wide that pass
Correct.
ends up being then? Do you have you started tracking where those potatoes come from in the field and then trying to figure out where they go into storage after that, if they go into storage?
So we do that. The solution that Stoats has doesn't do that just yet.
Okay.
But we do that with Greentronics. We have several customers that we do that with, and we're able to see exactly where in the cellar that potato went. Where if we had a problem in the cellar, then we can trace it back to where it came from in the field.
That could actually be a huge help for food safety programs.
Yes.
Because when I was running food safety programs while I was farming, I had to account for all of that too. So being able to track that back to the field make a huge difference.
Yeah. So our current solution, we have a timestamp, we have a location, and then we would know we would know if we were to, when that truck came in, what number it was in that cellar, but we're not, like Greentronics has that whole piece, the end-to-end traceability. And then I think the other thing that we've done at Stoats is we just try to figure out what are the problems that are out there in the ag space, and how can we use the technology to solve that problem. So we've even taken some of that Greentronics stuff and reversed it and then said, okay, it came from this cellar and we planted it here. So taking that information and figuring that piece out, and then we'll track it from there back to the cellar.
So all the way through, so from inbound to outbound in the end.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But it all takes money, right?
Corey Steitley told me 10 years ago or better now, he's like, that's nothing $1 million won't solve. And he said it as a complete smartass because he was my salesman at the time.
Yeah.
And he was always trying to get everybody to spend money, and he did a pretty good job at it. But just the way he nonchalantly said that one day, I don't think I'll ever forget, because it was also the middle of harvest and I really needed something. And he just said, yeah, no big deal. I'm like, all right, yeah, bring it up, fine.
Yeah. I've always said we can solve a lot of problems. It's just a matter of money.
It always is. So have you got anybody taking the data that they're getting from their yield monitoring and using that to make any prescriptions or whatever for the next year that goes in? Be it, so like if it's going from potatoes, has anybody had any success yet going into their next rotation crop, be it wheat or barley or cotton down south? I don't know what you plant.
Yeah,
exactly.
so I think it's growing. Like we have a lot of data on the traditional, right? Because we're not growing a potato there every year. So we have a lot of the data, that came from wheat or barley or
and that's the stuff
whatever.
that's easier to grab already because there's so much demand across the States and Europe and everywhere for it.
It's not a specialty crop.
Right.
Yeah, and so John Deere is always, really good at the corn and soybeans and the wheats and the traditional crops. That's their bread and butter. Yeah. And I think that's what we have to try to do here in the West is we have to try to take the solution that John Deere has that's for corn and soybeans and try to figure out how do I apply that to my growers that are not in the traditional grower space.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And that's kind of what this yield monitor thing is. Like they come out with a product and then we have to try to figure out how do we bend and twist that and actually make it work for this situation.
Have you taken your yield monitor data and then compared it to what's actually in the stores to see how accurate it is back and forth?
So yes, but the nice part is that number is editable. So if we know that we got 315 sacks an acre and a total of whatever that total was, we can put that in the system.
And then
what's really important is understanding the variability within that field.
Right.
So like I always say, the best practice is calibrate it, get it ready, but don't calibrate it within a field.
Yeah.
You want to leave that the same so that we can
across the field.
still understand where the variability was. If I do a calibration, then it's going to change yield one side to the other before and after that calibration. And really, if we get it close, that's good, but we can always adjust that later because we're never going to get it exact. Even with all the traditional yield monitors, they're doing so much now with like active yield on the new combines. But still, there's always it's not perfect.
So it always has to be interpreted, right? Because they use a weight system.
Yep.
And so if you're going through a low spot in your wheat or your corn or whatever, and it's a little higher in moisture, it'll throw it off a little bit.
Yep.
But so you have to take all of the information that you gather and then apply some actual just knowledge of your farm to that to be able to go right. Because like if you get a really heavy spot in your field, the yield monitor thinks your yield is great, and really what it is just a low spot. And you're carrying a lot of dirt on your machine, or it's just a low spot, and your wheat's a little bit wet, or your chaff is coming out real wet, and it just says that your yield's great.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true, and you don't want to fertilize to that.
But the best part is the farmer generally knows.
Yeah.
So it's really like you can't just use the data.
Yeah,
you have to take all that data and then really go back to the farmer because at the end of the day, those guys have been doing this for a long time. They know what works and what's causing that 9 times out of 10.
So how are you getting that? You're capturing the data and then you're going back to the farmer. How are you getting him to use that to do some variable rate stuff on their following crops?
Well, I think it's just a matter of bringing their understanding. Like they understand, what has worked in the past and what's maybe causing that. Then you bring in some of these extra layers, like, okay, here's our yield. Is it shedding water or is it retaining water? What kind of profile is it? Is the water running off of this part of the field or is it puddling in this part of the field? And we can manage based off of that difference as well. So then you take his information, combine it with all the data that we may or may not have, and figure out, okay, what is our best option?
So what are you seeing? Maybe not what, how much success are you seeing so far with variable rate technology helping your field and water management for farmers?
I would say it's still in the process. I think that in the traditional crops, there's people been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Right, and everybody understands that, and the logic's all there. But we also have to take into account the soil tests, right? We've been doing soil tests for a long time, and that we still have to try to figure that piece out combined with all the data, combined with the know-how of the farmer. It's a complicated piece, but ultimately that's what we want.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It's just funny because anytime I can't help but chuckle, and I think anybody who's ever farmed understands, like when you say something's complicated with farming, it's one of those things that's really easy to say, but it's so hard to actually understate because like, I mean, you can tell a farmer, but you can't tell them much because everybody's really stubborn, right? And not very many people are willing to be on the very cutting edge of this because one, it's expensive. Two, it's not proven exactly yet, right? And then by the time it actually gets to be completely proven or to where it's not expensive, so many other people have been doing it for a long time that you're on the back foot. So have you had any luck convincing somebody that they need to be on the cutting edge of this to be able to really gain some benefits off of it?
I would say that we don't necessarily have to try to convince people. We're pretty lucky, to be honest with you. Like I feel like we have some of the best customers that are really engaged and they're hungry and want to try to be better and try to figure out how can we make more money, right? That's what we're trying to do, is trying to make farming more profitable. And we've had great customers that we've been working with for a long time that are willing to invest in the technology and try something new and try to figure out, and then also work with us so that we can understand it and try to get better and try to figure out how to share that and to improve the overall.
So how are you taking, because all of this data can be pretty flexible, right? Because like it all needs to be interpretable because we went over the heavy spots in the field are going to show a great yield, but that's not necessarily true.
Correct.
The really light spots in the field might show a poorer yield, but that's not always true either. It just depends, right? Because it's not always
and it
straight
depends
about
on the year.
Right. So how do you take this data and then apply it going forward in a flexible enough manner to make it actually work for everybody? Does that make sense? Like that's a tough question because it's so open-ended. Like what works one year doesn't always work the next year. Like I remember when I was
because you don't have the same weather.
The best yield I ever had farming potatoes, we finished later planting that year than we ever had before by I think a couple of weeks. Harvest went really well, but like you end up with the shortest growing season we'd ever had because where I was farming, we had to kill our potatoes to be able to harvest them in time. Because if we waited for the vines to just die down, it was too late. It'd be October before we could be in the field, and any day in October was almost just like a blessing being able to actually use it. So, how do you take this data that you've got and then how do you take the data that you've got and then work with farmers on presenting an actionable plan?
I really think at the end of the day, most of it has to do with like presenting the data. Like let's look at this and let's figure out what's going to work for next year, right? And then make our best decision based off of the information that we have. I think it has to be personalized. The other thing that I think we really focus on, because we are an equipment dealer, like we want to focus on equipment and managing that input or managing that process. And we've really focused heavily on like trying to figure out, okay, if we can get this crop in the ground sooner, that's going to give it more time to grow, or maybe we're able to get it in before the storm. Like those things are big contributors to profitability. Same thing on the harvest end, right? If I know my harvest window and I can get it out before it gets mudded, or whether that's in the wheat side before the protein drops, or whatever that situation may be, like understanding and knowing that when the situation's right, I know exactly how to set my machine. I know that what speed we need to run for the best quality, and then like what we've done with a lot of our customers is really try to focus in on that. How can we make sure that this really expensive tractor is performing like a really expensive tractor? Not this really expensive tractor is performing like the 40/20.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that we're utilizing all that.
On the 40/20.
No.
There's plenty of people who will come and gut us if we say anything bad about that beloved tractor. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So the program that John Deere has for that is JD Link. Is that right? For
Yeah,
the
so
remote management tools.
It's the operation center is like
Okay.
that's the main hub. That includes the JD Link. JD Link is the telematics portion of the operation center. So that's what's feeding all the information into the operation center.
Okay.
And then there's also the JD Link is really all about the machine data. So our fuel utilization, our horsepower utilization, all the speeds, idle time. Are we running the machine or is it sitting there idling?
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Does the yield map, can you have that tie into how fast the tractor was moving?
Yeah.
On the yield as well? So you can see how quickly it was being planted for whatever crop, for whatever yield.
Yep.
That's actually kind of cool.
And we've had customers that wanted to tie back the planter, what planter planted, and what was the yield of this planter versus the next planter.
So you can track the speed on the machine, the hours
Yep.
on the machine, the maintenance records on the machine,
Yep.
which is a big one for anybody looking to actually be able to sell the tractor when they're
Yep.
done using it. You can track the planter that was used. I'm guessing that's just an implement track or something like that.
It's just all about the machine serial number.
Yeah, and so you would track that no matter whether it was a John Deere corn planter or a Sputnik potato planter. You just put it in by serial number and then track it through that way.
Yep.
And then that'll tell you if you use it right and all the time how many acres that particular planter has done, right?
Yep.
Is there a tool to be able to manage or track, might be the same thing really, the maintenance that's done on those planters through the operation center?
Probably not on those planters, but on the machines there is for sure.
Okay. That would be kind of cool to be able to tie in like the maintenance costs on the machine, and I suppose there's some programs out there that can do that, but to be able to have it all in one place would be pretty handy.
And we've been doing when we started doing this, several years back, the operations center was at a decent spot, but where we're at now, like the operations center and what John Deere has been able to do with the operations center and bringing all that data into one place, it's come so far.
If I remember right, the operations center started longer ago than I'd care to admit, but I think it was really in its infancy when people were trying to get me to bite off on it 10-ish years ago. The technology comes so far so quick that, you look at what tractors were 30 years ago versus what they are now. It's quick, but you look at what the technology was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it's even faster. What would you say the biggest advantages to using the operations center are versus maybe a competitor's?
Thank you for tuning in to the Culture of Agriculture podcast, part 1 of Precision Ag.